Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent with me, Gbenga Aborowa. This is the program where we bring you all the latest security updates happening on the African continent. But before we delve into today's program, let me bring you the latest security headlines on the continent. Russian advisor confirmed killed in Mali blast. Armed group attacks kill 3, injure 19 in northeast Nigeria. And the United Nations confirms attack on 8 organizations in the Central African Republic. Al-Shabaab claims responsibility for Somalia parliament attack. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Today on Secure the Continent, we will be looking at Ethiopia's truce and its fragile nature. Following the 17-month conflict between government forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, a humanitarian crisis has been created in northern Ethiopia and sparked famine fears in Tigray, which has for many months been under what the United Nations described as a de facto blockade. We have more details for you in this package.
After 17 months of a bitter war, weeks of diplomacy by the African Union and other foreign parties, the conditions for peace in Ethiopia seem to have ripened. A civil war between the Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed's federal government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front resulted in the displacement of millions and deaths of thousands. In July, following months of battles that forced the military out of Tigray, the government declared a unilateral ceasefire, but the TPLF dismissed it as a joke. But recently, in an attempt to hasten the delivery of emergency aid into the Tigray region, Ethiopian government once again declared an indefinite humanitarian truce. The opportunity for a truce between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front offers potential for hope, but is delicate and fragile. The truce is promising, but without an agreement on paper in place, there are still palpable fears that any of the warring parties may resume hostilities and fire a salvo. The warring parties need steps to recognize the legitimate fears and grievances of the other, a chance for turnaround and the opportunity for Ethiopians to be brothers again. However, sustainable peace requires a feasible nationwide dialogue. But the question is, can Ethiopia take advantage of this opening for peace?
Now, joining me today on Secure the Continent to discuss this and more, Meaza Gebremedhin, who is a researcher and human rights advocate. She joins in from Washington, D.C. Also joining later during the course of the show is Dr. J.F Trjer, an anthropologist and senior research fellow at Wheeler Institute for Business. And finally, researcher and media practitioner Gabriel Negatu is live on the program with me right now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Secure the Continent. A warm welcome to you both.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to start with Meaza. After 17 months, one of Africa's deadliest wars has yielded an opportunity to build peace as Ethiopia's government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front have declared a truce to allow for the humanitarian aid needed to prevent mass starvation across the country's northeast. What is the backdrop to this conflict?
Thank you for having me. And I think it's important to highlight that, first of all, the conflict is not between the government of Ethiopia and the TPLF. It's rather a genocidal war that was waged and continues to be taking place against the people of Tigray collectively, which is why over 7 million people are being collectively punished by the Ethiopian government and its allies, including the Amhara forces and the Eritrean government. And back to your point, the Ethiopian government had declared a humanitarian truce on March 24th, which was supposedly to facilitate the unfettered and unrestricted flow of humanitarian aid to the people that are in need in Tigray. However, since that declaration was made, the only thing we have seen is the international community prematurely celebrating this declaration, while the Ethiopian government still continues to block the undeniable access to Tigray, with only less than 6% of the needed humanitarian aid making it to Tigray. The people still are under dire need of humanitarian aid, including food and medicine, with thousands dying on a daily basis.
Thank you, Meaza. I'd like to bring in Gabriel Christus here. It's been almost a month since the declaration of a unilateral ceasefire by the government of Ethiopia. What's the situation of things on the ground, and how much aid has come into Tigray, and has it been a sustained flow?
Thank you for having me. No, the answer is no. The policy still remains the same, blockade, total blockade. And there have been 2 occasions of releasing dozens of trucks to reset the narrative. Meaza tried to capture, the problem with the narrative that we are dealing with. It has just several problems. One of them is just what Meaza said. It's just a war between the federal government and the TPLF.
But
that's not true.
My question is this. Sorry to interrupt. Is how much aid has passed through to Tigray? Because the reports of the International Committee for Red Cross and the World Food Programme, the reports of aid convoys making their way to Tigray. That's the question.
Yeah, so I'm trying to answer. So that there is no, let's just be very clear on that. There are only 2 occasions of aid. So in total, about 60 trucks of aid in a month, while Tigray is supposed to get 100 trucks every day. So that makes it between 3% to 5% of the aid that Tigray needs. But the international community and the aid organizations are celebrating this occasional releasing of aid, and they are being part of the resetting of the narrative. They are making it appear that Tigray is getting aid, while in truth there is nothing. But like a trickle is celebrated as a big news, and the Abiy government gets painted in good light. Aid is getting into Tigray, and everybody kind of forgets Tigray, and then things just come back again to where it is, the total blockade. So, but that's part of the bigger narrative that I try to talk about. The government, we should remember that this is an illegitimate government. It's not elected, while the Tigray government is an elected government. The government of Abiy Ahmed has mastered the art of deceiving the international community by just releasing token things and then making them, celebrate and engage in breaking news celebrations. That is what it has been doing for the last 1 year and a half.
Now, Gabriel Christus, what is preventing, and the WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, did emphasize the fact that it's just a trickle of aid that is making its way to Tigray, and like what you just said just now, that you need an average of 100 trucks per day. What is preventing these trucks from getting into Tigray? And also knowing where the situation was before the declaration of this unilateral truce, no aid, little or no aid was making its way through the land borders. So don't you feel the government in Addis Ababa should be given some time for things to ease?
What is preventing is the policy. This is a policy, it's a genocide. And one of the ways to implement this genocide is the blockade and the disease, the starvation. So it's a policy. There's no excuse. Some people just try to explain it, in terms of like little things. The truth is that this is a policy, and a policy that has been discussed not only among the Ethiopian actors, but also with foreign forces like Eritrea. So it's simply the policy of the federal government and its allies to subjugate Tigray, to execute the policy of genocide that they started this war with. So there's no other explanation for this. But many actors have failed for this deceptions that, it's conflict, it's this thing, it's, the Tigrayan forces. No, how could the Tigrayan forces stop, aid getting into them? It doesn't make sense. You don't kill yourself. So there is no other explanation for this. But the international actors have again failed, fell into this trap, of linking aid to humanitarian, to linking aid to military positions, to conflict. They're saying that demanding for Tigrayan forces to withdraw from every little positions, defensive positions they hold to protect themselves, to protect Tigray. But even after withdrawing from these little positions, nothing happened. Why? Because the police must be executed.
Okay.
They started this war with the intention of annihilating the Tigrayan society, and they are not going to stop. You don't stop a genocide just by appeasing. So yes, it is a policy of genocide that the federal government and its allies have in mind, and that they are executing, that's stopping the aid. Because if you feed the people, then where is the policy? Where is the policy of genocide that you started with? So there is the explanation as far as I am concerned.
Thank you, Gabriel Christos. Back to you, Meaza. Looking at the military situation and security situation in Ethiopia with regards to the conflict in Tigray, how is the truce holding out? Have there been any reported violations by any of the parties, and what possibilities does this truce raise?
Before I answer that question, if you allow me, I'd like to touch upon why is there only trickling of humanitarian aid to Tigray. As it was the case during the Second World War in Germany, where Nazi bureaucrats were basically using starvation as a war tactic through the implementation of the hunger plan, the Ethiopian government, particularly Abiy Ahmed, is convinced that the only most effective weapon in his genocidal ambitions against the people of Tigray is starving them to death. So the Ethiopian government is not going to give up one of the weapons that they deem is the most effective one in this conflict. So unless the international community forces him, the Ethiopian government would not give up using starvation as a war tactic. That's why there is only trickling of humanitarian aid, which is minimal compared to the dire need on the ground. So there are a lot of reasons that are being given by the Ethiopian government, including Afar forces blocking the trucks from entering into Tigray. However, we very well know that the Ethiopian government still controls the Afar region, because Afar is still under the direct command and authorities from the federal government. So if the federal government was truly committed to seeing humanitarian aid being delivered to the people in need, they would have put a mechanism on the ground that would facilitate that.
And what are international development partners saying? What's the Red Cross? What's the World Food Program saying about this delivery of aid?
A lot of international actors, including the World Food Program, have been very, very disappointing from my perspective. They have been disappointing in a sense that they were linking humanitarian aid with political issues. For example, you would see a lot of international actors calling for the Tigray Defense Forces to completely withdraw from Afar if humanitarian aid is to enter into Tigray. There are problems with this kind of narrative. First of all, you cannot link provision of humanitarian aid to civilians with political issues. This kind of notion, such kind of stands are considered to be war crimes under relevant international humanitarian laws. So the World Food Program and others have been pushing this kind of narrative. At the same time, they have been celebrating this trickling entry of aid into Tigray without mentioning the dire need of the people. For example, not long ago, 20 trucks have entered into Tigray. The World Food Program, instead of talking about the 80 trucks that are needed in addition to the 20 in order to meet the needs of the over 5.2 million people in Tigray on a daily basis, they were celebrating the entry of 20 trucks. This sends a wrong impression that there is humanitarian aid delivery to the people of Tigray. So the international actors, instead of continuing to babysit the genocidal regime in Ethiopia, they should hold them accountable and make sure that the promises that were made through declaring this humanitarian truce are implemented. So these are the things the international aid workers have been saying. But at the same time,
back to my question, yes, about the situation on the ground. Is the truce holding? And
yes, so back to your question, the Tigray government and its forces have clearly declared their commitment to holding the truce, which is why they have withdrawn from parts of Afar. However, we're hearing reports of the Eritrean forces mobilizing its troops and approaching Tigray to yet again launch another military offense, and we're hearing the same developments pertaining to the Ethiopian
but these are
National
just
Army.
speculations. Looking at the facts of the matter, the truce is held for almost 1 month. Will I be right to say so? There's been exchange of gunfire from both sides. Has the truce been holding?
The truce is holding in a sense because the Ethiopian government is using to mobilize its arms alongside its cronies to prepare for another offensive, which is why the Tigray government's president, Dr. Debretsion, has sent an open letter to the UN yesterday urging them to take meaningful actions, because Tigray can only hold for so much, because the government cannot really continue to sit idle by while its citizens are being starved to death. So although there are no flares of military that I can independently verify, but there is need for the international community to make sure that the promises that were made by the Ethiopian government are implemented, and that people do not continue to die of starvation and easily preventable diseases.
Thank you very much, Meaza. Now back to you, Gabriel Christus. Never in this 17-month conflict has there been a lull in violence that has lasted for up to a month. So we both agree that the ceasefire has and the truce has held. What should the participants in this conflict try to build from the ceasefire to a peace process, and what are the main pitfalls? Because it sounds, Meaza sounds very pessimistic that nothing great can come out of this conflict, because we've seen how things played out in the past. But this is the only period in this 17-month conflict that there's been a complete ceasefire that has been respected, that has not been violated by any part in the country. How much can you build upon this?
I'm not sure if we can call that the ceasefire is, holding. Yes, there's no conflict, but the conditions that must be fulfilled for the ceasefire to hold are being violated. One of the conditions is that humanitarian aid should flow, unfettered humanitarian aid flow into Tigray. As we just explained, only about 3 to 4% of aid has trickled into Tigray. So the conditions that must be fulfilled are not there. So really, it points to the direction of war, because if those conditions are not met, well, why would you're not going to die? Because one is succeeding with the aim of, starving Tigray to death. That is the Ethiopian regime is succeeding. So the Tigrayan forces, as just has been explained, yes, or as a letter written by the president of Tigray to the United Nations Secretary General says, they are already frustrated. They are saying, we're not going to sit and die. So really, what should happen is that these conditions should be fulfilled as soon as possible. So what does that mean? Well, humanitarian aid to Tigray. There should just be no condition for this. Aid must flow because people are perishing every day. And then restoration of services, all services, banking services, electricity, telecom, because then people can help each other. Now they can't help. People in one city can't even help each other, This is part of the bigger picture that we miss. Like sometimes it is this restoration of services that could be doing more help to the people than, this trickle of aid from abroad. If the government has any interest in giving peace a chance, it should just start with these simple things like restoring these services. It's as simple as switching it on because they have switched it off. So there are a lot of initiatives that the government in Addis could do, but that it is not doing. Why? Because they don't go with the bigger plan. Let's remember here, they even declared their intention to the European Union envoy to Addis, to the Horn of Africa, to Pekka Havisto. They said, we are going to wipe out the Tigrayans for 100 years. That is a genocidal intent. I'm not going into what they talk every day in the local languages. It's just festering with genocidal language, with wiping out people, exterminating them completely. So if you allow the people even to help each other, they feel that they are losing the plan, the plan of exterminating the people. So really, I think what the international community should do is that it has to have a concrete plan, for measuring progress, because now we don't know anything, and then for also bringing about some ceasefire. Now there is nothing; it's just talk, and the Addis regime is very adept in manipulating people and manipulating, in churning out deceptions and in playing with the weakness of the international actors. And on the other hand, Tigray has no voice. Remember, it's under communications blackout. People can't even cry. We can't even see images of people perishing, in their thousands every day. So really, what should happen is the conditions that that were promised, by the actors that are trying, like by the US, Kenya, the AU, that are trying to bring some kind of ceasefire. But they are really not measuring anything. They are not delivering on what they promised. Like these are the humanitarian aid I talked about, the restoration of services. These are important steps, and they don't require anything. So this, to me, should happen before the ceasefire is really violated with conflict, because people are not just going to sit down and perish. That is just, it doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Gabriel Christos. We will definitely get to that part of diplomatic efforts that have been put together to solve the conflict. We'll get there in the course of the show. I'd like to bring in Meaza here. Ethiopia, the second most populous country in Africa, is quite complex with different ethnicities. And we've seen that the theater of war is not only in Tigray, it has spilled into neighboring Afar and Amhara regions. What is the humanitarian situation there?
Surely war affects everybody, and because of the genocidal war that was waged against the people of Tigray, and because the mishandling of disagreements by the Ethiopian government in different parts of the country, the humanitarian need of civilians is staggering across the board. For example, in Oromia, there is a full-fledged war that is being carried out by the federal government, and civilians in the Oromia region are also in need of humanitarian aid. And I would assume other neighboring regions to Tigray and others would have humanitarian need. However, the very important thing here is that a lot of international aid organizations, including the World Health Organization, the World Food Programme, and others, have full and unfettered access to all parts of Ethiopia except Tigray. We have seen reports of World Food Programme dispatching food and the WHO dispatching medicine to Afar and Amhara regions. There is only an illegal siege warfare being used against the people of Tigray by the federal government. So while there is humanitarian need in different parts of the country, but it's only Tigray that has been completely sealed off without any access or aid being delivered to the people by international aid organizations.
Okay, thank you, Meaza. At this point, we will go on a quick break, and when we return, we will be discussing solutions to ending this 17-month conflict in Ethiopia. Do stay with us. This is Secure the Continent on News Central Television. Thank you for staying with us. If you're just joining, this is Secure the Continent. We have been discussing the prospects of peace in Ethiopia following the declaration of a truce almost a month ago. We're monitoring the truce and seeing if this could lead up to sustainable peace in Ethiopia. I still have here with me Meaza Gebremedhin, who's a researcher and human rights advocate. Also joining us in the course of the program will be Dr. J.F Trjer, anthropologist and senior research fellow at the Wheeler Institute for Business and Development. And finally, we have Gabriel Negatu here with us, a media practitioner. Gentlemen and lady, I would like to get back to Gabriel Negatu. Will this truce, I know you've sounded quite pessimistic about what's going on and the truce and how just a trickle of aid has been pouring in, and the government's, you're quite disappointed in the government in Addis Ababa. Will this truce bring about sustained relief for those who need it, or is it just going to be a pause in the fighting? What are the prospects of the truce holding?
It's hard to not be pessimistic about this situation. I follow Ethiopia, and I know the character of this regime. But there are some things that might work. And like I said before, I think the conditions for the truce, the humanitarian truce, are being violated by the regime in Addis. And the international community has failed in not only really in holding the regime, accountable to the promises it made, but also really in not telling the truth. So there's a lot of failures there. They don't tell us the truth. I mean, like I'm talking, for example, about the United Nations Secretary General, telling, I mean, what to me, almost like, disinformation, because he talked about humanitarian aid inter-integral after a week, like contributing to the story that, to the image that there is some new humanitarian aid flowing to Tigray. So really, they have been completely disappointing. I'm not,
but
that's not to talk about Africa.
Sorry to interrupt you here. Don't you think, I mean, I'm not saying, because the condition in Tigray is quite dire, and like most analysts have said, you need an average of 100 trucks per day, but not to make the situation any lighter. Looking at where the situation was in the middle of the war and senseless killings, don't you think it's it's a major step that is worth noting, and that was what the UN Secretary General did?
No, I mean, it is, and you can celebrate it within, within the proper context. But when you talk about, about it like in as if it's a new beginning, and after a week, while aid has already been stopped, that kind of like is not correct. You are creating an image that doesn't exist on the ground. You're making people, are eating while they are not eating, while they are not receiving anything. But having said that, there is still some hope if the international community, everyone else, anyone that's concerned, anyone that has leverage could, apply whatever leverage they have. And that is this. Because Ethiopia is in a very dire condition economically. The government is really looking for money. They are in a very desperate situation. And their reputation, the regime's only currency before was, this propaganda against Tigray. It has galvanized the people against Tigray. But now the brunt of the war is being felt by the broader Ethiopian society. So there is really some kind of, I think, to me, what it looks like a change in the Ethiopian society. They're trying to see now, the war has consequences on them. So I think there are some disincentives for the government to continue this position. It's not gonna continue to do this and appear as their government. So if the international government, like actors, are gonna support the government, but they kind of like put these conditions, that there should be measurable progress, there should be concrete steps for ceasefire. There should be unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray, restoration of services. These are just easy steps. These are, the rights of the Tigrayan people. The Tigrayan people contributed, built these infrastructures. They are denied for 1 year. It's just, and on top of that, these are illegal. You don't use these as weapons of war. So if the international community really is serious, beyond this like occasional celebrations and being part of this genocidal narrative, I think there is some hope in this. But I should say it's very slim chance. So that is the way I see. I think to move forward, just take steps, positive steps. Open, restore services, ask the Eritrean forces to withdraw from Tigray, ask the genocidal Amhara forces to withdraw from Tigray, as the international community is asking Tigrayans, the Tigrayan forces to withdraw from neighboring regions, like bordering areas. They should do the same. And Tigrayans then would have confidence in the international community, because the way they see Tigrayans now, the way I see it myself, it's just that the international community is really part of the Abiy regime in terms of propaganda and in terms of its actions. So they should change, and I think there is a chance. Otherwise, the consequences are big. Ethiopia is gonna implode. I mean, there's nothing that's gonna hold it, I think, if it continues in this direction for some longer time.
Thank you, Gabriel Christus. I would like to bring in Meaza here. Meaza, still talking about the international community. Just recently, the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, recently said that attention to Ukraine is very important, but international media must also shine a spotlight on atrocities in Asia and Africa. What's happening in Ethiopia is a tragic situation. People are being burned alive. My question to you, Meaza, is this. Is the international community failing Ethiopia? And why are international efforts to stop the war failing?
Yes, indeed. I agree with Dr. Tedros that the international community is failing the people of Tigray, to be specific. They're failing the people of Tigray by not only turning the blind eye to their suffering, but also by emboldening the genocidal regime in Addis Ababa to continue massacring and eliminating them in the dark. And while the attention to Ukraine is very much deserved, but the message that's being sent by being completely and rightfully outraged about the war crimes that are being committed against the civilians in Ukraine and remaining quiet or justifying what's happening to the people of Tigray is setting a precedent to other dictatorial regimes to do as they please with their selfless civilians. And the main reason why I think the international community is failing the people of Tigray is, one, as it has always been the case, this is yet again another reminder that African lives are not worthy victims of war. And this kind of message is not only being sent by Western members of the international community, but also by leaders of the African Union. The African Union leaders themselves, you would see them crying river about hostilities and civilian that are being affected in Ukraine, but they're justifying the war against the people of Tigray. At the same time, the international community is failing the people of Tigray by not holding the Ethiopian government accountable, by not seeing it for what it is, a genocidal regime that is using starvation and siege as a war tactic, in addition to destroying public infrastructure and raping women. And I believe the international community somehow thinks that the Abiy administration is redeemable and that they can bring about peace and stability to the Horn of Africa by maintaining Abiy Ahmed's power. But what they don't see, what they don't seem to understand and to agree on is that the Ethiopian government, particularly the Abiy Ahmed's regime, has normalized chaos and suffering of innocent civilians since he assumed power. Since the coming of Abiy Ahmed to power, Ethiopia has become synonym with chaos and conflict. Civilians are being attacked left and right, not only in Tigray, but all across the country. today you will find conflicts and you will find human beings being burned alive under the watch of the federal government. So how the international community thinks that such kind of leadership is the one that will bring peace and stability to the Horn of Africa is beyond me. And in addition to the international governments, you have the World Bank now approving over around $300 million to be given to Ethiopia. And I believe, and a lot of us within the Tigray community believe that this money will be used to sustain the Tigray genocide. And this kind of support is being given to the Ethiopian government because the Ethiopian government has mastered deception and misinformation, and the Ethiopian government has successfully used notions such as the declaration of humanitarian truce to ease pressure from the international community. So,
Meaza, sorry to butt in here. When you talk about the international community represented at the United Nations is the Ethiopian ambassador, you have representatives of the central government in Addis Ababa. Does Tigray not have any friends in the international community that are sympathetic to the humanitarian situation and the plight of the Tigrayan people, or is it because national governments will be breaking a diplomatic protocol? They consider what is going on in Ethiopia as a civil war, and they wouldn't want to interfere in the domestic affairs of Addis Ababa. Is this one of the reasons why this conflict isn't getting as much attention as it should?
That's a very good question, because I think it's important to give a good image of Tigray. Tigray is a region within Ethiopia. It's home to less than 10 million people. And so these are a group of people that have been historically marginalized economically and diplomatically as well. So we don't have the diplomatic connections that are necessary to move policymakers and have them take meaningful action.
But just before the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took power, even though the Tigrayans make up less than 8% of the population of Ethiopia, they held government in Addis Ababa for almost 20 years. So how do you say they've been marginalized at the same time if they've been in authority?
Yeah, again, thanks for asking me that question. One of the disinformation that's out there is that the TPLF, which is the political party representing the people of Tigray, has single-handedly administered Ethiopia for years and years. That's factually incorrect. Since the downfall of the military authoritarianship government called Derg in 1991, Tigray had a multinational government that was leading the country by forming a coalition of political parties to which the TPLF was a member. So there was a coalition of political party called EPRDF, which encompasses political parties from all parts of Ethiopia, including from Tigray, Amhara, Oromia, and other parts of the country. So all these political parties came together and they administered Ethiopia for over 2 decades. However, since Abiy came to power, he was not elected, he was selected by this coalition of political parties. He had to find a boogeyman in order to justify the genocidal war that he was preparing for. So he successfully seeded this narrative that the TPLF had single-handedly governed the country, which by implication makes the people of Tigray having an upper hand in the political and economic matters of the country. But that's not what happened. The people of Tigray were part of the Ethiopian government through their representative, the TPLF, and yet the democratic and the public infrastructure in Tigray was minimal. The people have been historically and economically marginalized, but this kind of narratives have been pushed there in order to effectively dehumanize us and justify our demise, just like what you see today. So because of that fact, we don't have the necessary network within the international community to make sure that our plights are heard and governments take concrete steps in order to stop the suffering of innocent people. But in addition to that, as I said earlier, members of the international community, particularly the US State Department, seem to believe that Abiy Ahmed is an actor of peace. Well, everything we have seen so far since he came to power has showed us that he is committed to destabilization and mine in the country and not
but
peace.
He owns, I mean, is the recipient of a Nobel Peace Prize. Does that not count for something?
it's ironic. It's very ironic how the Nobel Peace Committee would give this kind of honorable prize to someone so prematurely. Yes, of course, there was a deadlock between Eritrea and Ethiopia for over 20 years. And once he came to power, there was a staged peace. Actually, the agreement, the details of the agreement are not even known to anyone, not to the people of Ethiopia, not to the leadership within Ethiopia, and definitely not by the Eritrean people. So in our assessment, the peace agreement that led to Abiy Ahmed getting this Peace Nobel Prize was anything but peace agreement. It was rather a military pact that was signed by two leaders who were confident and believed that they had a common enemy within the people of Tigray, and they made this arrangement in order to sandwich people in Tigray and exterminate us.
Thank you, Meaza. Gabriel Christus, looking at what we've been discussing since and the situation in Tigray, it's quite dire. The United Nations says that 3/4 of Tigray's 6 million people were resorting to extreme coping strategies to survive, and that hunger was also rife in parts of Amhara and Afar. We've seen what television does when it comes to modern warfare, and I guess it's one of the reasons why a lot of people sympathize with the Ukrainian people following Russia's invasion of their country. Now, can you paint a picture of what the humanitarian consequences of this war is on the people of Tigray?
This is, very difficult for me to even put it into words. Let's just recap, some of the things. When the Allied forces invaded Tigray from all directions, they were just shooting at anyone they find. They were just shooting anyone. And then they were also targeting any infrastructure, factories. And then later on, they were visiting, the house to house. In some cases, they say, this, I'm quoting their words, they say they have been instructed to kill young people from the age of 4 all the way up to 60. So they have been selecting these people and killing them all over Tigray. In Western Tigray, Don, which is a very fertile area bordering Sudan, they have razed, towns and villages completely, uprooting about 1.2 million Tigrayans. So these people are unaccountable. We don't know where they are. But we have found some evidence of what has happened to them. Their corpses have been found floating in the river that flows from Tigray to the Sudan. So maybe you might have seen the news, of people being corpses being collected from the river. The mass graves, everywhere. About in a part of Tigray, a preliminary study found about 120,000 Tigrayan women have been raped. That's in a part of Tigray I'm talking about. About 80% of the health facilities in Tigray have been destroyed completely. So now in the entire Tigray, there is no medication. So all these raped women cannot get support. There is no food. So, but the more disheartening thing here is that you can't even hear this because there is communications blackout. There is no electricity.
We do
people have
understand,
no telephone.
and
they cannot report.
And this is quite a tragedy, but because we don't have so much time, a quick question to you and Meaza. While the truce declarations are pivotal, there's still no written agreement. My question is, what are the most important next steps that need to be taken to reach a well-defined agreement, one that makes a difference in the lives of the people? I would appreciate if you could answer in less than 1 minute so I can move to Meaza, because we're fast running out of time.
This is, I think, what I would like to say. The people of Tigray deserve peace. They are a very peaceful people. And there cannot be peace in Ethiopia and in the Horn of Africa without fairness and justice. That means, that there should be restoration of services, there should be humanitarian flow, the Eritrean forces, the Amhara forces should withdraw from the constitutionally recognized Tigrayan territory. And there should be an independent investigation of crimes, and the Tigrayan people should be given a chance to decide on their future, whether they want to live with Ethiopia that has waged a genocidal war on them, together with foreign countries, or whether they want to be an independent country.
Okay.
Anything less than this is just to prolong the suffering in the Horn of Africa. That's what I want to say.
Gabriel Negatu. Now, to you, Meaza, what will it take in less than a minute to bring about lasting peace to the people of Tigray and Ethiopia as a whole?
I think before we talk about peace, we should give enough emphasis to the suffering of the innocent people which continue to be starved today. So I think members of the international community, particularly the UN, African Union, and even the US as a unilateral actor, should put punitive measures on Ethiopia and Eritrea. They should impose targeted economic, diplomatic, and other types of sanctions on them so that they can effectively force the Ethiopian government to opening the humanitarian corridor to Tigray, and people can be saved. Innocent children and mothers are dying of starvation and lack of medicine. So first, let's save those lives, and maybe after that, we can talk about finding peaceful mechanisms to the conflict. As the Tigray government has already made it clear, they're committed to finding peaceful resolution, but only after the people have access to food and medicine, at the same time after Western Tigray is freed from all the invading forces.
Thank you very much for your time and contributions to the program, Meaza Gebremedhin and Gabriel Negatu. It was a pleasure having you join me on Secure the Continent.
Thank you for having us.
Now, the war in Ethiopia and its dire humanitarian consequences underscores the need for urgent calibrated action to consolidate and build on this fragile ceasefire. Ethiopians and their supporters must seize this moment to consolidate a durable ceasefire and end blockages to humanitarian assistance. This effort should open a path to broad dialogue to set a shared vision for Ethiopia's future growth potential and long-term stability. But the essential first steps are complex and will need to be taken carefully and swiftly. Until next time, remember to join me on Secure the Continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa. Many thanks for being a part of the program.